restorative model. So thank you.
I would also share a little bit of what Judge said as well as far as sacrifice. And this one was a little tough for me because I don't view what I do as sacrifice. I view it as a blessing that I get to do this work, but it definitely becomes an extension of who you are. Being on the different committees, you take your work home with you. Prior to doing what I do now, I spent 10 years in crime victim services, so I took on a lot of the pain and what victims would share, and I don't view that as a burden, but when you absorb those types of things, you have to make sure that you take care of yourself as well. And I'll end, I spend time every morning in the Word and spend time with God. That's how I start my morning every day, and I'm so thankful for that. And this morning, one of the scriptures was, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. So I truly believe I'm just one of his vessels, so I don't view it as a sacrifice at all.
Thank you all. Next question. What do you see as the biggest obstacle to advancing restorative justice in Michigan, and what do you think the solution is?
You want to go first this time, Judge, so we can mix it up?
Sure, I'll lead off. And I'd like to say I'm very grateful to have a voluntary audience. Usually my audience is pretty captive there in the court, so it's just astounding that people will actually voluntarily listen. I think the obstacles are the one I talked about earlier, that, there perhaps is a gut reaction to, say, law and order and tough on crime in the public sphere. I think the more practical day-to-day obstacles are simply a lack of resources. I think it was an excellent question that came from the audience about mental health. The statistics show that about half of people who are in jail or prison at any given time have received some sort of mental health treatment. And so, to address that in a very small way, I started a treatment and support court here in Kent County, and these are nonviolent offenders. They may have repeated offenses, but the criteria to get in is a felony charge and a diagnosis of mental illness. And the goal is to, find the resources to help folks out in the community to prevent them from going to prison. Because, from my listening to people in that situation, just simply being in jail or prison itself is a traumatic experience. It would be traumatic for anyone. It's particularly traumatic for someone who's suffering from a mental illness. If you can only imagine a paranoid schizophrenic being in that crowded, noisy environment that even the best run prisons and jails present to people. So, I was reflecting that when a person is in a mental health crisis, right now the wait to find a counseling appointment, to say nothing of a psychiatry appointment in this area, if you don't have great insurance, perhaps you're on Medicaid, can be up to 2 months. And I said, boy, you don't tell someone in a mental health crisis, okay, I'll get you someone to talk to in 2 months. They need faster return on services. And it really does come to our law enforcement folks, our jails, our prisons to fill that gap. I'm very excited about the initiative to have mental health professionals accompany law enforcement people on some of these calls in the hopes that, maybe they can redirect people initially that otherwise might wind up in jail just simply there's nowhere else to send them. And be able to access some of those resources right at the initial encounter with law enforcement. But those are very new attempts, and like I say, I have 40 people in mental health court, and there are probably at any given time 400 people who need that level of service. So unfortunately, the resources we have only scratch the surface of the need.
So in regards to this, the first thing that came to mind, I spent some time last night. I was able to go in last night, and it was so powerful, and I was able to spend some time talking to Val Marcus, and You know, he asked, what does it look like? How does the bill look? What do you think? He basically said, you know, what do you think the obstacle is? And I said society as a whole, accepting or viewing it as it is healing for everyone involved. It's healing, it's an option for a victim, for the offender, for society. And I told him we really need more people to see his story, right? I mean, if you saw that today for the first time, I've probably watched that video over 50 times, and not to watch myself in it. And I cry every time. That part is so powerful, and that's what we need to show people, is there's individuals behind that. So I believe the biggest obstacle is that we need to educate society as a whole.
And I would say, I wouldn't say it's the biggest obstacle, but one of the ones from my perspective, and it adds on to what both of them have already said. I think sometimes the church becomes part of the obstacles. And when you look at the scriptures, take just Matthew 25, and all throughout the Old Testament up into the New Testament, God's heart for those who are incarcerated. Right? And you look at many times in the Old Testament when God would charge Israel with something. And it was usually a consistent theme, because they were in and out of captivity. You know, it was from Egyptians and then Syrians and then the Chaldeans and then the Philistines and then Babylon. And every time he would send a prophet to come and correct them about something, it was always issues dealing with the widows and orphans, the strangers, and the prisoners in the land. And it's almost like God has a special place in his heart for those who would be considered the least of these, right? And when you look at Matthew 25, and Jesus puts it very clear, you know, he talks about those who were hungry and thirsty and those who were in prison. He says, when you didn't come and visit them, it's just as if you didn't come and visit me. So what you've done to the least of these, you've done it unto me. So Jesus actually makes himself one of those, one of the prisoners. And so he's actually inviting the church. If we take just Matthew 25, Jesus is saying, come find me. The churches are crying out for revival and want a fresh wind of God's Spirit to come through their church. They want to see a revival amongst the youth and amongst the houses of worship. And he's simply just saying, come find me. When you go to the prison and you visit with those inside, you've come to meet with Jesus. When you come there, he says, I'm here. He said, just come find me. And I think, and you'll notice, especially those of us who are involved with going into the prison, we're just as blessed as those who are in there when we do come in. Right? And I think God's biggest battle is not Satan. It's the unrenewed mindset of the believer. It's we just haven't renewed our minds to what God actually thinks and says about those who are incarcerated. Right? And I think one of the challenges of the church and how we've gotten into this lackadaisical approach missionally, and specifically as we're talking about reentry and those who are incarcerated, is we've heard people say all the time in the church that I can do nothing without him. And many of us probably have said that as well. What the battle and the challenge is that we've learned how to do nothing with him. Okay, we've actually become comfortable with doing nothing with him, while at the same time we'll say we can't do anything without him. God's biggest battle is not Satan, it's the unrenewed mindset of the believer. We have to renew our minds and let our hearts settle in what the Father's actually called us to do. And we're involved, but there's a whole bunch of us. We're worldwide. We're the biggest organization in the world. We're a living organism that is here to go into the darkness, not judge it, not condemn it, just go in and just turn the light on. But this should be the mindset of the whole church. And just think of how powerful that could be if the whole house, all those who declare Jesus Christ as Lord, how powerful that would be in terms of restorative justice.
So what personal stories can you guys share with us about the power of restorative practices?
I guess I'll go too, since they're not grabbing the microphone. Personally, what was very restorative for me was the way that God literally surrounded me with people who were his children at the time when I came home. And the people who blessed me just tremendously. I was home 3 days, and a guy, I'd never met him before, a guy came up and told me that God told him to give me a car. Exactly. That's how I asked him. I said, "You playing around, man?" He said, "No, I'm dead serious." A guy I had discipled in prison and walked with came home before I did. He told me, he said, "God told me to buy you your clothes for you when you come home." And he bought me a bunch of clothes when I came home. When I was, so that was restorative to my heart, because when you're coming home, prior to coming in, I'm selling drugs and involved with the street gang, so I'm coming out to a world that I know nothing about. Okay, I was like when Jim said, I come home at 30 and I didn't know, I'd never paid any bills before. That was me. So all of this was brand new. This was uncharted territory. This is space I had never been in before, so there was a bit of, the fear of the unknown, so to speak. Like, what do you expect when you come home? What can I expect? And what helped in that restoration process, and as I was still healing on the way home too, was that God was just winking at me, and he was taking care of things that in some regards, it was just the cry of my heart. I haven't even verbalized it really in prayer, but just the cry of my heart. And he would wink at me, and he would bless me with things. And for me, that was a part of restoration to my soul. And then obviously in that, just a wonderful church family that I was able to get involved in. And it was a group of people who knew how to celebrate who I was without stumbling over who I wasn't. And that mindset right there was restorative, because I was free to just be me without having to try to, because when you come home from prison, you're an odd duck. You get around people who've never been incarcerated. It's almost like you think, man, do people know? And the people around me probably, a lot of them probably didn't know, but you wonder in the back of your mind, because you feel awkward out here. You feel a little different, because this is like new territory you're venturing off into. And so the people that were around me, that God placed in my life, were instrumental in that whole internal restoration piece for me.
I can relate it to actually two personal stories. When we were kids, our house was broken into right around Christmas time, and they literally stole all the Christmas presents. And I remember thinking, why? Why would they take our Christmas presents? Why would they come into our home? Those individuals were never caught. Now as an adult, just a few years ago, our house was broken into. And I ride bike, and my not very cheap pedal bike was stolen. And my mindset this time was, what was in their thought process, or what went on in their life that they felt this was what they needed to do? So I could literally look over time how my mindset was transformed to not make it always about me. And that has happened too with serving crime victims. I can't tell you how many times I sat in a court and just sat there in my mind thinking, Judge, just give them the maximum prison sentence. I now have come full circle, and I smile because I know what God was doing then, preparing me for what I'm doing now. But now I know that that person at that podium has a story too, that there were contributing factors that took, a large part, a large role in their choices. So I think when we can start one way and almost come full circle, that really is the point of restorative justice, is to see all sides of it.
And I can relate an experience. I just saw this last Wednesday in my courtroom. I was sentencing a young man for grand theft of an automobile. He had stolen a young couple's truck, hotwired it, had broken the into the steering column to hotwire it and stolen it because he was addicted to methamphetamine at the time and simply needed to sell the truck to get money to buy more drugs. Was the only thing on his mind. Of course, he didn't know the people at all that he stole the vehicle from or anything of that nature. And this, in fact, was the first time the victim came and gave a victim statement, as Michigan law encourages them to do. And she said, I just wanted to see who this was and see if I could figure out why you did something. She was originally Canadian, and to her, the very idea of someone stealing someone else's car, I could tell it was almost unthinkable to her. And she described some of the impact that the loss of the car at that time, and of course at this point now was a year ago, but she'd had to drop out of school. She'd been working on a degree to get a better a job in the medical field, and she'd had to drop out of that to earn more money to buy a replacement car because the car had been damaged so badly that they couldn't drive it. They couldn't get to and fro. They were trying, of course, her and her husband to work and raise a couple of kids. And I glanced over at the defendant who stood off to the side while she was giving the statement, and I could see that he was emotionally struck by all of this kind of ripple effect that his crime had that I'm sure he was totally unaware of as well. He didn't target her truck or anything else. It was just the truck available at the time to steal. She ultimately wanted him to get some help. I recommended him for a program that we're fortunate to have, the Sober Living Program at the Kent County Jail, and then out of there into a recovery housing type thing to get treatment for that addiction. And the hope is that he'll rehabilitate himself and be a member of the community. But even in the moment of his sentencing and seeing that indirect exchange between the victim and the perpetrator, I think there was healing that occurred because she understood what motivated him and he understood the ripple effects of what he did. So I was grateful to be able to see that just 2 days ago.
Why are you passionate about restorative practices? Has there been a person who has inspired you to get involved with advancing restorative practices?
Why am I passionate about restorative justice? Well, because I was involved with it, and just the whole experience of incarceration inspired me and wanting to see. When I came home 10 years ago, there wasn't OSP, there wasn't the offender success, so there wasn't all of these resources and people who would walk with you through it. When you left, you got out. It was almost like figure it out. And so now with what Angie's doing and the whole OSP team across the state is just phenomenal. And so when I came home, there was that piece. It wasn't here like what it is today. And so for me, I wanted to be a part of the solution and use my experience to be a part of that. Hence, part of the reason why we started Fresh Coast Alliance in Muskegon was part of the language that I've used from the very beginning was we need to reinvent reentry, because what they were calling reentry at that time, for me, it was like, okay, what is this? Where's all this money going to? In terms of helping. So I wanted to be a part of reinventing reentry, and let's reinvent this thing. It's something that's holistic and something that's practical, and we can actually see people who get out and 5-10 years later, they're out and they're actually thriving. They're doing good. Their families are restored. Their marriages are restored, or they've gotten married, or they become homeowners, whatever that looks like. Success is different for every single person. Okay, but getting from a place of returning home to a place to where they're actually living this thing out, and going backwards is not an option. So that's what motivates me.
I echo what Nate says as far as being part of the solution, and that's something that him and I work on probably the most. We do a lot of different things together, but to be part of the solution working with individuals coming out, going in. My favorite thing to do is to go into the prisons. Or if I get to go into parole and actually interact with somebody who needs something, just to have those conversations and to be humbled. What can we do better? So I just believe if being part of it, you know, being part of the committee that Trish started and just going out and actually doing the work is why. That just, it rejuvenates me to keep doing more for restorative justice, because it is one of the answers. It is definitely one of the answers. It is a solution.
And I would say part of my passion certainly comes from my faith. I wrote down on my response sheet to the men at Handlon, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth here as it is in heaven. And I certainly believe that reflects God's deep desire that we, while recognizing that we're imperfect people working with other imperfect people, we strive to implement a society, a community that does reflect the inherent value of each person, and also ultimately the forgiving image of God. That those things are things that we're able to work toward in a practical way in society. I'm also inspired by so many individual stories. I had the opportunity a couple months ago to visit the men's group at Handlon and to see a group of men like that who are facing, you know, very long Michigan Department of Corrections sentences, almost the worst case we could imagine for a living person. And to see them bringing a place of light and hope into such a dark space is extremely inspiring for me, because if the men can make it happen at Handlon, then it can happen anywhere. So I'm grateful for the experiences it's given me. They do continue to give me a passion for the work.
Last question, and then we'll open it up to questions from all that are listening. How do you get buy-in from your peers for restorative justice? What can each one of us, meaning the men at Handlon and here, do to help advance restorative justice in practices?
It is educating society, educating your family, educating your friends. I take the opportunity anytime. If I can go speak at a college, if I can go speak at a church. And it was probably 5 or 6 years ago. It was actually when we were doing a presentation for GROW. I don't even remember what the question was, but that was the first time that I really made it personal and I shared the friendship that Nate and I have. I always really wanted to respect that Nate is who he is now. He's not the crimes he committed. He's not the person that spent 12 years in prison. But I learned when I share that he comes to my home, that our children play together. My kids think he's just the peas pod. We have game nights together. People really started to, it was almost like a light bulb went off. Like, you bring this person into your home. So I will share about that. I'll share what Ross and I do together. Ross will say, ride or die. And he has a history too, served years and years of incarceration, and I don't see that Ross. I see the Ross that is out doing great work in the community. But again, when I share those personal stories, people view it differently. And recently, he's been out for a while, but William Kitchen is somebody that really also made a huge impact on my life. He spoke at our Reentry United conference. He's still on parole. William went to prison at 14, served 21 years, and he always reminds me of the one, because I usually will say 20 years, and he's like, the other year matters too. He spent most of his time in solitary confinement. He will talk about throwing feces, urine on individuals, how he viewed himself as a dog. When I interned at the prison, I worked on the segregation floor, and I can tell you the thoughts when I would leave that floor of the individuals who threw feces or urine. I thought, you belong here and you will never change. And it took this long for me to say, Yes, they will. William is proof of that. In fact, he texted me today to tell me how he's going to be contracting with juvenile youth so that he can do some mentoring. He does a lot with Nate, goes in and speaks at schools. We're actually should know next week if he will be accepted to Grand Valley State University so he can start his degree in criminal justice. So those types of stories are why this can have a ripple effect, and it is up to us. It is up to us to educate people and to share the personal connections so that they can understand it even more.
And when I think about getting buy-in from my judicial peers, anyone who has labored in the judicial system knows that that happens slowly. Just it's the nature of the law. People tend to want to get very comfortable with an idea before it becomes mainstream. And the way I try to do that is by sharing some of the success stories, for example, from my treatment and support court of people who I've seen make enormous turnarounds, and to emphasize, to the other judges that this is possible. Not everyone is successful, but that some people will be successful, and for those folks, it will make a world of difference. At least that is my fervent hope and prayer down the road when they're long out of my courts and they're back with their families and in the community, that they're able to live with much more of the dignity that God intended them to have. So I try to share that. It is very slow going in the justice system. If you came to court on a sentencing day, and I've attended, of course, many of my own and many of my colleagues' sentencings, you could very easily leave with the impression that we're operating a factory or a conveyor belt, because sentences are sort of similar. The language is by necessity similar because people have to be advised of certain rights and their rights to appeal and things like that each and every time. And it would be very easy to go into a courtroom and think, what we're doing here is a factory system that treats, everyone just as a unit or something. And I think the importance is, and what the law charges me to do, is to look at the individual, both, in terms of fashioning an appropriate sentence and in attending to giving them the best chance that they can have for success out in the community. And I try to share the successes with my colleagues on the bench, and if there are non-successes, then I keep those quiet. So, and in that way, I hope that eventually, and I do believe newer judges coming in are more familiar with restorative justice and the idea of treatment courts and that being successful. I think we have shifted away from the old model of just lock them up for as long as we can and move to a more restorative model, and I think that'll continue to happen gradually.
My buy-in's a little easier than judges. So I'm able to, and obviously it's the unique thing for those of us who have been incarcerated, where we actually have the experience. And then when you couple that with living your own solution out, it makes it a lot easier for individuals to buy into it. Because then you're going to be present in conversations, speaking and educating people on things. And we get to do a number of speaking engagements together, and I get to travel and talk about this pretty often. And that's a part of it. And I think it gives hope to parents when they see other formerly incarcerated people that are living their faith out and they've come out of the justice system. It gives hope for them and their children. It gives hope to, I could only imagine how many people the judges have come in front of them all the time, repeatedly, right? Where you go on an A, B, and C, and D prefixes back to prison, and every now and again there's individuals like myself and others who are sitting in this room who have won the war over staying out, and it doesn't make the job seem like it's hopeless. It's like, okay, there really is a God out there who transforms people's lives. Jesus still is mighty to save, and he's mighty to deliver. And it gives hope that God can still intervene in the most worst situations. And I think it's being present in those places and constantly for us here is drawing attention to the one who can actually solve the problem, right? Because until the heart condition is actually confronted and dealt with, then the cycle of defeat is going to continue to perpetuate itself, because discipline only lasts for so long. And until there's a genuine change of heart and a renewed mindset, it's going to be tough. And without those two things in cooperation and in the same rhythm, this unforced rhythm of grace, until these two are on the same page, it's going to be hard for people to buy in that restorative justice is actually the thing. Because we've come out of years of the iron fist, right? Lock them up, throw away the key. And part of the confusion is because if you ask a number of people, everyone has a different definition of what they think justice is. So what is restorative, healthy justice? I'm of the opinion that true justice is that which holds you accountable for what you did, but it also shows mercy at the same time. And it doesn't mean, oh, you did this, we'll just forgive you. And it doesn't mean that we hand out unsanctified mercy, because that does more harm than good. We do have to hold people accountable, but we also have to be able to show mercy at the same time. And I think when we represent that type of justice, it's easier for people to buy in and say, you know what, that's it right there. You know how you just know when you know her sometimes? When you get confronted and you actually see that on display, like the video we watched earlier of the mom who forgave her son's killer. It's just like internally, it almost brings you to tears, but internally you know that's it. That's what it's supposed to look like. As we live that out and we let that just be represented in everything that we say and do, the places that we're at, I think people are going to continue to buy into that, and it's going to be restorative. And so with the guys inside, you know, like what can they do? Continue to talk about it. Continue to renew your mind. Continue to stay in conversations about what that looks like, because there's going to come a day you're going to step out of the prison and you're going to come into society, and you actually have an opportunity to be a part of the solution. And, you know, like being in those conversations, being in those places where it's things you fill your mind up with the books you read, the music you listen to, the people you call your friends. I always think of the old adage, me and Judge might not be able to relate to it much, but if you hang out at the barbershop long enough, eventually you'll get a haircut. So if you stay in those conversations long enough and you fill your mind up with it, you meditate and you hang around people who are actually thinking restoratively in their thought processes, eventually you're going to jump up in the barber seat and you're going to get a haircut, and that's going to just be the way that you think.
Thanks,
Judge,
Nate.
guys, Judge, go ahead, Judge.
I'm still working towards that haircut, as you can see. Got some catching up to do, but I'm glad to be in the barbershop anyway. As a closing thought, it did have the presentation up here that indicated it's true, Michigan has outlawed the death penalty since 1963. However, even before 1963, we had never executed a state prisoner. We executed prisoners when it was a territory. We've executed 2 federal prisoners, one in 1938 and one in 2016, Marvin Gabrion, that committed their crimes in Michigan, but we are the longest republic on earth not to have implemented and now to have a direct law against the death penalty. And I tell people I like to think that's because we believe that no matter what a person's done, there is always hope for that restoration, and that it's not for us to make the decision that the condition is hopeless and thereby end their lives. So I'm proud to be an elected official in a state that's had such a great history on the death penalty.
We're almost out of time, but we'll take one question if anybody has a question. I think yours went up first, right straight back. So,
I'm from Friends of Restorative Justice in Washtenaw County, and we've been working for more than 10 years to get restorative justice. We have a prosecutor that wants to do it. We have a judge that has been doing it for a long time, but we're still not getting that many cases. You addressed this a little bit with getting buy-in from your peers, but you didn't, one of the problems we thought was, how do you get buy-in from the victims, the people who have been hurt? How can we promote that?
I believe that's for you.
Well, the one thing, and we've discussed it on the panel, is the importance of proceeding on the victim's timeline. That when someone has been injured by crime, it's going to vary when they're ready to begin that restorative process. The young woman I talked about in court who lost her truck that was stolen, she was ready at the sentencing time to begin a restorative process with the person that had harmed her. But that's not always true, particularly in the case of violent crime. Sometimes that comes more slowly. And the challenge is the legal system, as deliberate as it is, does want to move forward and doesn't take a pause for that restorative process to start. And I don't think that as many victims are probably aware that there are restorative options where they can have some input into what happens in the crime where they were victimized, because my contact with victims leads me to believe they feel pretty shut out of the system. So just getting that information to them, whether it's through the victim witness unit at the prosecutor's office, putting up posters, publicizing, some of these documents that we have about restorative justice, just to heighten awareness and to have them asking questions about how they might engage in the process, because I think it's just not well known yet that that's even available.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, panelists. If you have more questions